to mankind. In Christianity, the Logos would be regarded as but one of God's triune modes of existence revealed to man, the Logos being one of the Trinity. Marginalia, not a numerical one. Back to the text. As we have seen, from Heraclitus to the Stoics to Philo, the Logos was well known for some 6 centuries before John's Gospel, written around 100 AD, which began, "In the beginning was the Logos." Where for Philo, the Logos was not God, for John, the Logos was God. As to why John did not use the term wisdom instead of Logos, obviously the Greeks had long known the Logos, but had no idea of Judaism's personified wisdom. Some authors think John did not use the term Logos as understood philosophically, but used it as understood in Proverbs, as God's incarnate wisdom. John, however, was familiar with the Jewish understanding of wisdom and could have used the term, but the fact he did not do so means he deliberately chose Logos and not wisdom as his reference to God. If one could fully grasp the meaning of Logos in the Gentile world of Christ's time, the incarnation of the Logos had more meaning than the incarnation of the Old Testament's wisdom, with which the Gentiles were not familiar. Then, too, wisdom could just be regarded as an attribute of God, whereas the Gentile Logos was never so understood. Though the term wisdom is almost synonymous with Logos as God's transcendent mind or knowing, yet even Irenaeus questioned, quote, "How can a quality or attribute of God be hypostasized, i.e., be made a distinct one of the Trinity?" This does not mean the Logos is not God's wisdom, only that its cosmic dimension is more understandable when it comes to grasping its incarnation, making itself one with man's human nature. Irenaeus is the one who succinctly pointed up the difference between God's wisdom and Logos. He said, "Where wisdom is the essence of God ad intra, immanent in itself, the Logos is God's wisdom manifested and revealed ad extra in creation. Thus, wisdom and Logos are just 2 sides of the same coin." And Marginalia, she says elsewhere, that there is no separation between God ad intra and God extra, and that if we can know God ad extra, we can therefore, in fact, indeed, know God intra. It is also worth noting, however, John never began his gospel with, "In the beginning was the Son, and the Son was with the Father, and the Son was God." The Logos, of course, had no father, and was never begotten. John must have known the Greeks would never accept such metaphoric personifications. While some may think God as a personal father and son had the advantage over the philosophers' impersonal one or Logos, matters were just the opposite. Father and son made God 2 human beings, which the philosophers would only have scoffed at. Although there is no proof John or Paul read Philo's works, we know Greek philosophy was well known to the Jews outside Palestine. Scholars at least have no trouble pointing out the Stoic influence in John and Paul. Both, after all, were part of this culture. As already noted, few people realize that quoting Paul is often like quoting a piece of Stoic philosophy. This is why Christianity, as presented to the Roman Stoics at least, entailed no great leap of faith, because it made sense to them. We could take this to mean that Christianity was presented to them more philosophically than doctrinally, more, that is, in keeping with reason than reliant on Judaism's personified scriptures. Marginalia, appeal to reason with 3rd book. Back to the text. While some think John or someone added the Logos prologue after his gospel had been written, there is no evidence for this. When the gospel first appeared, 90 or 110 AD or so, this prologue was there, in place, and so it remains. That John himself wrote it makes sense when we consider he wrote from Ephesus, the city celebrated as the birthplace of Heraclitus, the elder of Greek philosophy, whose statue was still in town in John's time. It is equally interesting that St. Paul was born in Tarsus, a city renowned for another Stoic philosopher, Zeno, not the original Zeno, however. Not only among the Gentiles was the term logos a matter of common knowledge, but even among the educated Jews of Jesus' time. While it is easy to call this mere coincidence, who can say this was not all in God's plan? When it comes to a right understanding of Christ, God left nothing to coincidence. Marginalia, yet we ignore the Greeks and Jesus' humanity. Back to the text. Justin Martyr, 100 to 165, counted Heraclitus as a Christian before Christ. Quote, "They who have lived in the company with Logos are Christians, even if they were accounted atheists. And such among the Greeks were Socrates and Heraclitus." End quote. Justin taught that divine truth appears in two forms. First, in man's power of reasoning, and second, in special revelation, such as given to philosophers, prophets, indeed, to all men. It is a pompous notion God is only revealed to certain people and not to others. She says elsewhere, God reveals itself to all human beings. Back to the text. That God revealed itself solely to Moses and his people, but not to the Greeks, the philosophers, or anyone else in the world, is ridiculous and not historically true. That there is a God for some people and not for others is the essence of polytheism. Given the long history and understanding of Logos, we can now ask how this term was ever erased from John's Gospel, I want to say John's Gospel, as the term Word substituted in its stead. As best I could research, it is said the Romans or Latins, quote, found it impossible to translate logos by any single word and therefore adopted the phrase ratio et oration, reason and speech, and thus the term verbum, or word in English, was substituted for the original logos. John, of course, never said in the beginning was the Word. For him, logos was not a reference to any written word or uttered word, nor did any of the early fathers have this understanding. Even Cyril of Alexandria said, quote, "The logos of the Father of the universe is not the uttered word, but the wisdom and most manifest kindness of God, and his power too," end quote. The idea of the logos as some kind of utterance, speech, or word is too absurd for words. It seems that in the absence of the Latins having the Greek understanding of logos, they gave it their own etymological definition of utterance, sound, expression, or word, which it never meant to the Greeks. For the Greeks, etymologically, it was akin to reason or mind, logic being a derivative. That the Romans redefined logos as word is the ultimate etymological fallacy, use of words to mean something other than their intended usage. The Romans substituting word for logos has to be the greatest etymological fallacy of all time, the ultimate Christian fallacy. For any sound or utterance to be a word, it has to have a meaning. Thus, to say, "In the beginning was the Word," well, what word? To be told it is a reference to God speaking can only be a reference to some anthropomorphic deity or other. And who ever heard a word becoming incarnate? No one who has ever seen or known God's omnipresence in creation would ever, in a million years, think to call God a word. Thus, the utter impoverishment of the term word could only have been invented by those who, in truth, do not know God. Indeed, Christianity has totally missed the Logos, missed God, missed the one of the Trinity that became incarnate, and consequently missed Christ. It has been pointed out that, quote, Word of God was a common Jewish reference to their scriptures as the, quote, law of God. In time, of course, Christianity adopted this same phrase, Word of God, for its own scriptures, which in neither case was ever understood as logos. Interestingly, the Stoics regarded the logos as the, quote, law of the universe, or law of nature, a natural law, however, very different from Judaism's understanding of law of God. the Bible